Welcome to part 4 of my Murder at Castle Nathria card review. I'm going to be reviewing the cards that have come out since my last video. If you're interested in the other cards in the set that were revealed prior to that, feel free to check out parts 1, 2, and 3 on my YouTube channel here. Taking a look at Druid. Druid's actually gotten a lot of cards revealed since my last video. Starting right here with Convoke the Spirits, we've got a 10 mana nature spell, cast 8 random Druid spells, targets chosen randomly. So Druid getting everybody's favorite spell, Puzzle Box of Yogg-Saron. This card is going to be really interesting. I think if you take a look at, I glanced at the Druid spells to see, what exactly this is going to do. So Druid typically doesn't have removal. Like when Mage plays Rune of the Archmage, you're basically expecting it to remove your opponent's board. They've got Fire Sale, they've got Flame Strike, they've got direct damage spells. Typically, you see you're able to remove your opponent's board. Druid is not going to do that because Druid spells typically aren't a lot of removal. Potentially you could expect to draw cards, you could potentially expect to cast Celestial Alignment, which could be good or bad depending on your deck and the situation that the game is in. So I think this is one of those cards that we're going to actually have to test in-game just to see what the average outcome is going to be and how good it's going to be. Druid does have a lot of buff spells, so certainly playing this when you have minions on board is probably going to be the better idea. Those buff spells can also land on your opponent's minions though, so really could just be a mixed bag, and my feeling is that this is not going to be as good as Rune of the Archmage. But Rune of the Archmage has been pretty insane, to be honest, in my opinion, since this most recent expansion. So it's going to be an interesting card. It's going to require some definitely some testing, I think, to really be able to rate how good it is. So right now, it's just one of those cards that's hard to evaluate, and we'll see. Nightshade Bud, 8 mana spell. Choose one, discover a minion from your deck to summon, or discover a minion from your deck to summon, or a spell to cast. Sorry, I thought I was misreading that for a second. So choose one, you get to pick a minion in your deck to summon, or you get to pick a spell to cast. So certainly there's a deck building requirement to this. Deck builders, this is kind of like a deck builder's dream. And again, this is one of those cards, we're not going to know how good it is until we actually test it. You can't put like low-cost minions in your deck. You don't want to put bad spells in your deck. With the choose one, at least, discover. If you go for a minion, you're going to get a choice of 3 minions in your deck, and of course, with a spell, you're going to get a choice of 3 spells in your deck. So, if you compare that to something like a Moonlit Guidance, how often does Moonlit Guidance actually whiff? Well, probably more than you would really prefer, to be honest. But you're actually able to specifically target either minions or spells when you cast this, so probably a little bit more consistent than Moonlit Guidance, and if you build your deck the right way, you should be able to do what you want to do with this card when you play it. So I think this is going to be a good card. It's definitely going to see play, at least in the early days, and experimentation, and we'll have to see if anybody can come up with something busted. I do think there's a lot of potential here. The choose one may actually be a bit of a drawback when you start thinking about trying to tutor out like the high cost cards in your deck with a Cold Tooth Mine. When you play Jerry Rig Carpenter, this is just an extra card that can be hit by it. So, an 8 mana, discover a minion from your deck to summon, as well as an 8 mana, discover a spell in your deck to cast. This would be bad if it got hit by Jerry Rig Carpenter, in my opinion, just because of so much mana. And again, just for me personally, when I see these like 10 and 8 mana cost cards, it scares me. They're usually not playable. Druid, of course, is its own special scenario, thanks to Ramp and thanks to Guff. Moving on to Plot of Sin, we've got a 3 mana summon 2/2/2 Treants, infuse 5, summon 2 5/5 Ancients instead. So 3 mana summon 2/2/2s is kind of on par. It's not bad, it's not good. For the mana cost of the card, generally speaking, I think 3 mana summon 2/2/2s is bad. I don't know that this card is actually going to see any play. It does have upside with Infuse, but Infuse 5, typically you think about Druid that infusing is going to be easy for the class if you're running like Scale of Onyxia, because that's potentially going to be a lot of minions dying in a single turn. But when you're sticking this in your deck as a 3-cost card, if it's in your hand on turn 3, you likely just have to play it, unless you have like a wild growth play of some kind. And 2/2/2s, it just really isn't all that good. So I don't think the card is that good. It does have the nature tag, so we'll have to see if this fits in or not. Overall, I think this is a bad card, and it likely only sees play if we're trying to stack nature spells. Planted Evidence, 1 mana, discover a spell. It costs 2 less this turn. This card definitely sees play. This is a good card. Just the discover mechanic is typically pretty good, and then being able to discount it by 2 mana this turn, mana cheat, is almost always good as well. So you have this in your hand on turn 1. Maybe you fish to try to find like a Wild Growth or a Nourish or whatever you need to be able to support your deck. And if you draw it later in the game, then you could discover something and actually play it same turn. So I think Planted Evidence is going to be good. There's probably going to be games where, we're above 10 mana and we Planted Evidence, discover, convoke the spirits, and then play that. So good card, definitely going to see play in my opinion. We've got a Druid Legendary here, Cecily of the Fey Court, 8 mana, 8/8, Taunt, Death Rattle, draw a minion, and reduce its cost by 8. Again, this is another deck builder's dream card, assuming that, there's something worth getting out. A reduced cost by 8. Certainly you can build your deck with a small number of minions so that you can be able to get something good, whether it's something like, Malygos, just to be able to draw your deck, or maybe like the spell power version, +5 spell power, be able to play that for free. You can potentially hit something very, very strong and be able to play it for cheap, or, at most just 2 mana. So I think this definitely sees experimentation. Whether or not that's going to be good enough, we're going to have to wait for the set to actually come out and be able to test with it. But interesting card to say the least, and this is a card that likely only gets better as more and more expansions are added to Standard. 7 mana, 5/5, Topior the Shrubagazer. Battle cry for the rest of the game. After you cast a nature spell, summon a 3/3 Whelp with Rush. Card seems really strong. 7 mana. That's one of those things, again, with Guff and with Druid Ramp, you should be able to get this out before turn 7, and being able to summon 3/3 Whelps with Rush is going to be really strong. So pretty much you would expect to build a deck with a lot of nature spells to have this card included with it, and then every time you're casting a nature spell, summoning a 3/3 Whelp with Rush, you really shouldn't have a problem holding on to the board, or at least staying board neutral, just meaning your opponent puts minions into play and then you remove them. If not, actually just take the board with like leftover 3/1s and 3/2s, and even 3/3s if there's nothing left to attack into on your opponent's side of the board. So definitely think this card is strong. It's going to depend on how good the nature spells are to be able to play with this, but should be a good card. Definitely think this will see some play. The text on it is actually really insane, and again, going forward, as more and more cards get released, more nature spells, more high quality nature spells, the card just gets better and better. And then we also have Natural Causes, 2 mana, deal 2 damage, summon a 2/2 Treant. This seems just like decent removal. 2 mana to deal 2 damage and summon a Treant is pretty good. You could use it for removal. You can also use it to damage face. So if you think about like a spell power Druid deck, we're now going to have Natural Causes. Potentially we could tutor out like a Cecily of the Fey Court. And if the only other minion in our deck were, say, like a Malygos, +5 spell damage Malygos, then, we have like Moonbeams, and we have Natural Causes. Potentially we have Moonlit Guidance to be able to generate extra copies. So at this point, I think you could potentially be looking at like an OTK Druid deck. OTK with spells, spell damage Druid, possibly coming back. So it's the first thing I thought of. We'll have to see if we have the support and if it's going to actually be good, but I do think that's one direction that you could potentially take some of these cards to be able to go forward into the next expansion. So I kind of hope so. I really enjoyed Spell Power Druid the last time it was an actual deck, so we'll have to see if we're able to keep it going. I do know there has been some experimentation. It's just not there quite yet without the extra support, but support could be coming. Taking a look at Shaman, we have a 3 mana 0/3 totem. At the end of your turn, summon a random basic totem, infuse 2, summon 2 instead. So if you infuse this and you get it down, potentially you're summoning 2 basic totems every turn. It's going to get removed immediately by your opponent as soon as it's in play, being only 3 health. Its support for the totem archetype of Shaman, as of right now, card is bad. Totem Shaman is going to need more support. So I'm just going to go ahead and say this is a bad card. We will revisit this card, though, in future reviews if more totem support for Shaman is revealed as part of this set. But for now, I'm going to say the card is bad. Warlock, we have another legendary that's been revealed. 5 mana, 3/6, Lady Darkbane. Battle Cry, summon 2/2/1 Shades. Each gains a death rattle to cast your last shadow spell. So I think this card is going to be good. It is just a little bit slow because the 2/1 Shades are going to have to die in order to repeat your last shadow spell. But potentially you play this card, you have the 2/1s, and then you can Mortal Coil your own 2/1 to be able to get the death rattle off like the same turn you play it. Warlock typically has a lot of targeted burn spells or targeted removal spells. So you think about like Touch of the Nathria, Drain Soul, Mortal Coil, all of which are actually shadow spells. So I would assume that you would build this deck, of course, with Tamsin and lots of shadow spells. Potentially Curse Warlock could use something like this to be able to get extra curses. If the last spell that you cast was, say, the Dragged Below, then potentially you're going to be able to stack curses really fast if your opponent's hand is able to hold those curses. Or actually, you stack the curses even if your opponent can't hold the curses. You just don't deal any damage with that particular curse. So I think this card's going to be good. Should definitely see some play, and it's really going to be built around a shadow spell deck, of course. Shadowborn, 3 mana, 3/3, death rattle, reduce the cost of the highest cost shadow spell in your hand by 3. This is a 3-drop. I don't really know how good this death rattle is with the shadow spells that we have in the game. I think it ends up being pretty good with this Shadow Waltz, but the other shadow spells, I'm not sure that we even necessarily would want to play this because of how impactful the mana reduction is going to be. Typically, mana reduction is always good, but a lot of the shadow spells are already cheap anyway. Things like Drain Soul, Mortal Coil, yeah, you can make them free, but it's really not that big of a deal. And then if you make them free, they can't be repeated with Tamsin. Potentially, this is good in, again, Curse Warlock, because you have like Abyssal Curse. Instead of having to wait till turn 6 to be able to get the 4 damage board sweep, you would be able to get that out the following turn, on turn 4. So it could be good, just not sure about the utility with this card. Moving on to a Shadow Waltz, 5 mana, summon a 3/5 Shadow with Taunt. If a minion died this turn, summon another. So pretty much, unless you have minions on the board to be able to make trades, 5 mana for a 3/5 is bad. It's just a little bit too expensive. A 3/5 Taunt isn't all that impactful, especially if you use your entire turn. So, you know, if it's turn 5 and you have a minion and you can make a trade and a minion dies, then being able to summon 2 3/5s is actually significantly better. This card is just a defensive tool, summoning taunts. You're not going to kill your opponent with 3/5 taunts. So we're going to have to see how things are going to play out as far as this goes. Potentially a card like this could go into maybe like an Imp Warlock deck or a Zoo-like deck. So, you know, as you build your board, you're going to have minions on the board. You could make a trade and then summon 2 3/5s. Adding those 2 bodies to the board could be powerful. The Shadow itself, it's not a demon, so you're not going to be able to buff it like you would other demons with something like that 5 mana 4/5 Bartender card. But could be some interesting things happening here. So definitely, I think you have to build your deck a certain way to be able to get full use out of this, to be able to summon 2 3/5s. Outside of that, you're probably looking at not being able to play this on turn 5. Maybe you play it on, like, say, turn 7. You drain Soul an opposing minion, and then you put down 2 3/5s. So a defensive card in a lot of cases. I do think it'll have applications in an aggressive deck, though. And getting 2 3/5 taunts in an aggressive deck is actually, you know, pretty strong. So we just have to see where it comes down. 5 is kind of that awkward mana range, to me at least, for aggro decks, because it starts to get a little expensive, but should see some play, I think, at least some experimentation. Rolling on down to Hunter. Hunter's actually had a couple of cards revealed. I believe that was it. Yeah, that was it for Warlock. A couple of cards revealed for Hunter here. 3 new ones since the last video that I did. Frenzied Fangs, 2 mana, summon 2 2/1 Bats. Infuse 3, give them 1/2. It's a pretty solid card. I mean, 2 mana for 2 2/1s actually isn't all that bad. I think you're really more interested in the 2 attack than you are the 1 health. Putting 2 minions on the board on turn 2 is pretty good. We would expect to see something like this in an aggressive style of Hunter. And then multiple minions on the board is going to be good with something like a Huntsman Altamore, or, you know, any cards that would infuse. I don't think you play Stonebound Gargan in like a Huntsman Altamore deck. But although it would make sense to run multiple infused minions if you're going to be running a lot of like tokens and token generator cards and things like that. So I think really all 3 of these cards, you really start to see how they're going to fit into a Huntsman Altamore deck. This card, I think, goes into a Huntsman deck, and probably not anything else, though. Typically, or I would say that you probably just want it because of it generating 2 minions rather than just 1. Spirit Poacher, 2 mana, 2/2, Battlecry, summon a random dormant Wild Seed. And when we take a look at the Wild Seeds here, there's a 3/1 with Rush, dormant 1 turn. The dormant for 2 turns is a 2/5 taunt. That's a pretty big taunt, but it's also dormant for 2 turns. And then dormant 3 turns, we have a 5/4. When this awakens, equip a 4/2 Great Bow. These cards do have mana cost. They're only actually important if the card gets bounced back to your hand with something like, say, a Freezing Trap or a Scab's hero card from a rogue. These cards are all actually really strong. They are dormant, but on the turn that they awaken, it's just a strong card. And you're not spending any mana on these outside of the 2 mana initial investment of being able to drop this down. So this just for me is an independently really strong card. I think this probably goes in every single Hunter deck. It's just a really good card, and it's going to fit in really well with the Huntsman deck because it's going to put 2 minions on the board, which gives 2 opportunities for infuses for the cards that we have in our hand. So definitely a strong card, and definitely a card that goes in a Huntsman deck. Likely goes in basically everything else as well, except for something like, say, Quest Hunter, where you're just not running a lot of minions. Potentially, you maybe even run it there if it ends up being better than maybe some of the Nagas that are in the deck currently as well, though. Then we have Batty Guest, 1 mana, 1/1, Death Rattle, summon a 2/1 bat. Again, this is okay as a 1-drop. The value of this card is likely just summoning an extra body on the board that can die for your infuse card. So again, these 3 cards for me, first impression, they're going to go in a Huntsman deck. Kind of the question that I have about a Huntsman deck, though, as we start to see more support revealed for it is it going to be good enough? I said in my last video that this card is insane. I think it's very, very strong. The issue is going to be getting to turn 7 and really playing this card and ending the game. Like with a Leok and a Huffer, or, you know, maybe a Huffer and a Misha, whatever it turns out to be. Of course, summoning 3 would be better than summoning 2, but, you know, if you play like this on turn 1 and this on turn 2, how long do these minions survive on the board to be able to punch your opponent in the face? If we're not able to actually do face damage against our opponent outside of hero powering, then we're just never going to be in a position to win. To me, this is like an aggro deck. You know, you want to play cheap cards that summon multiple bodies, you want to infuse, and you want to be able to go face. So is this deck going to be good enough to compete against other tempo decks that have like rush minions removing the board? You know, a good example of that would be like Rogue. You have Gnolls that are going to be removing at least 2 minions, in some cases maybe even 3 minions, just because the Gnoll has 5 health. So how are you ever going to be able to do damage to your opponent's face, at least in an amount where you'll be able to end the game with a Huntsman Altimore? So I did start to theory craft out a deck like this with Huntsman, just based on the cards we have available, plus the new cards that have been revealed. I kind of wonder if the Naga package is maybe the way to go with this deck, where you have the 3 mana, summon 2 Naga, you would run like a Vicious Slither Spear, maybe a Murkwater Scribe, probably also the Terror Coil, Twinbow Terror Coil, 4 mana, 4/4. If you played a spell, it causes the next spell you cast to cast twice, so it's going to require some experimentation. We're going to see just how good this is, but to me, these cards, you know, really going into an aggro deck with Huntsman as the payoff, and this one card, really, really good, probably going to be in every single Hunter deck. Demon Hunter with a couple of new cards here. We have Magnifying Glaive. After your hero attacks, draw until you have 3 cards. When I first saw this card revealed, I thought, man, this card is terrible. In a vacuum, I think this card is terrible, but when you start to look at some of the other cards that have been revealed, it looks better and better. 3 mana on a 2/2 weapon really isn't good, so it's really all about the text on the card. At 3 mana, is this text good enough? So we'll just move right into the next card as we continue to talk about it. So Crixus the Voracious, 4 mana, 7/7, Battlecry, discard your hand, Death Rattle, draw 3 cards. So for 4 mana, you put a 7/7 in play, you discard your hand, and then it has a Death Rattle to draw 3 cards. So if you play this on 3, potentially you just hold the attack. You have this on 4, and then you attack to draw 3. This dies, and you draw another 3. Now you've been able to really get a big hand as an aggressive Demon Hunter deck, and really looking to close out your opponent starting, you know, turn 5, turn 6, turn 7. So as a combo, these cards are good. Crixus, of course, is going to be vulnerable to silence. Also, I'm not sure that just a 4 mana 7/7 cuts it in Hearthstone anymore. You know, previously Shaman had a 4 mana 7/7 that had Overload, and I think it was pretty strong at the time. But now, does the 7/7 actually survive? Can you actually just ignore it and go face against your opponent if you're playing against an aggressive deck? So we're going to have to see how this plays out, but these two cards combo well, and certainly the 7/7 is going to be nothing to sneeze at. We're going to have to be careful as we address this if our opponent's playing this against us. So vulnerable to Death Rattle looks like a pretty strong card, though. Big body, and really the Battle Cry has no effect whatsoever. Yes, you discard your hand, but with the Death Rattle, it looks like you're going to refill your hand. Hard to imagine that you would be throwing away more than 3 cards unless you're just doing nothing. And if you're doing nothing with the Demon Hunter for those first few turns as an aggro deck, you probably lost the game anyway. So as a package, these cards, you know, seem like they're going to be good. Probably going to be experimented with in aggressive Demon Hunter decks. Then we have Bibliomite, a 2 mana 4/4 Battlecry. Choose a card in your hand to shuffle into your deck. Again, when I saw this, I thought, well, this card is bad. Yes, you get a 4/4 in play, but you're also -1 card in hand, which can be impactful. You know, if you run out of cards, you run out of things to do, and you just kind of run out of gas. But again, with Magnifying Glaive and being able to fit all 3 of these cards in the same deck, now we start to see kind of a package coming together. So, you know, turn 1, maybe you hero power, you play this on 2, shuffle one of your, you know, cards that you don't need back into your deck, then you play this on 3, this on 4, and, you know, it starts to look like a pretty strong Demon Hunter aggro deck. You know, likely you're going to still be playing all the Fel spells in a deck like that, Chaos Strike, Fury, so on and so forth. And so you get these big bodies on the board, you do damage face, and then, you know, you start to draw into other cards and potentially looking to finish off your opponent with those Fel spells. So these cards, I think, as a package, are going to be good, and they're going to see play, but they're not going to see play individually, I don't think, outside of that. Like, you could never play this in any kind of, say, like, control Demon Hunter, if such a thing would come about. And I wonder, do you even really want to play it in a Relic Demon Hunter style deck? Because, you know, if you have relics in your hand and you discard the relics, they're just gone, and then that affects your ability to be able to snowball future relics. That's something that maybe isn't even a concern, though. You know, just it's going to have to be tested to see how good and or bad it's going to be. So overall, as a package, I think these are okay and likely to see play. Getting down to Warrior, 1 new card, 4 mana, Burden of Pride. Summon 2 1/3 Jailers with Taunt. If you have 20 or less health, give them 1/1. So if you have 20 or less health, you would summon 3 2/4s. So generally speaking, this card, it's definitely the kind of card that you would see, I think, in a control deck. You know, potentially there could be some type of an aggressive warrior deck. There's still a lot of warrior cards to be revealed. If you're going to be taking damage to your face, for example, if you have an aggressive warrior deck, you're playing minions on the board, and then you're equipping a weapon to be able to attack and remove your opponent's board to try to preserve your own board, taking damage, you know, being able to summon 3 2/4s for only 4 mana is potentially pretty strong. But when you think about this in like a control deck, you know, control decks, it's usually pretty late in the game, I think, before they have 20 health or less. It kind of depends on their draw, but typically like a control warrior deck is going to be gaining a lot of armor, which means when they're being attacked, they're going to be losing armor and not health. So really going to have to see where the meta shakes out to figure out whether or not this card sees play. Warrior currently is just a really weak class, and unless they get some pretty powerful cards, this card won't see play by virtue of Warrior not seeing play. So card has potential to be good, but not sure exactly where it's going to fit in just yet until we see more of the Warrior cards revealed. Several new neutrals revealed since my last video. 6 mana 4/7 Kael'thas Sinstrider. Every 3rd minion you play each turn costs 0. It feels like you're gonna be able to cheat out some insane combos with this. I mean, if this is the first minion you play on a turn, you know, you're potentially looking at like this, Bran into, you know, really powerful Battlecry minions, say like a Sire to Nathria or something. It is a lot of mana, though. Like, this is a card that you draw, and you kind of have to sit on it until you have other combo pieces. I think this is definitely like a combo piece kind of card. Probably gets a lot stronger in a deck like Druid, just because Druid is able to have, you know, so much more mana and being able to play so many different things. So, the last time Kael'thas was in Standard, I believe he had to be nerfed because he was just too good. That card, of course, affected, I think, spells rather than minions. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I really don't know. Mana cheat is just so strong in Hearthstone, and being able to play like really, really big minions for 0 can potentially just be broken in the game. So this card could actually be pretty strong. Famished Fool, 5 mana, 3/5. Battlecry, draw a card. Infuse 4, draw 3 instead. I think the card's bad, too expensive. Infusing 4 isn't really realistic. And even if you actually get it infused to be able to draw 3 cards, 5 mana to draw 3 cards, there's not a lot of decks where that's going to be a good play and a play that's going to win the game. I'm going to say this card is bad. 5 mana, 6/5, Sin Runner, Death Rattle, destroy a random enemy minion. Again, I think this is just a bad card. It's not going to see play. You play the 6/5, maybe you get the trade with it for 2 minions, but likely it's just not going to be good. It's bad against aggro decks because you probably trade and it doesn't die because, you know, the aggro decks might be running like, say, 2, 3, and 4 attack minions. And then if it doesn't die, you're just trading 1 at a time. So too expensive really for the effect, and I'm not sure that the 6/5 body is relevant in any way whatsoever for this particular card. So bad card in my opinion. 2 mana, 2/2, Battlecry, discover a secret from another class. I'm going to go ahead and say this card is bad because there's so many bad secrets in the game. It does add a card to your hand, which I guess is good. It creates a little bit of utility, but you know, you could hit like some worthless Paladin secrets or, you know, just really, really bad secrets. And then you still have to pay mana to be able to play those secrets. So I think this also is a bad card. You know, if like Secret Mage or Secret Hunter becomes a thing, maybe it's good to discover a secret from another class, but I kind of doubt it. Just because, again, you still have to pay mana to be able to get that secret into play. So I'm going to go ahead and call this a bad card as well. Forensic Duster, 3 mana, 3/4. Battlecry, your opponent's minions cost 1 more next turn. This card is at least slightly interesting in that it, you know, forcing your opponent to pay 1 more for their minions on the next turn can be good. So if you play this and your opponent has a board, they pretty much have to trade for it because if their plan is, you know, to play a minion that turn at least, they may not be able to afford to play it if you get this down on curve. I don't know if it's going to be good enough to actually make it into any standard deck, at least right now. It's going to depend, again, on the meta, how prevalent are minion-heavy decks. You know, Blizzard has told us they're trying to move the game in a direction where board matters more and where there's going to be more minions in play. So it could potentially be good in a situation like that, but overall, it may just not cut it with the 3/4 body. But the text, I think, certainly has the potential to be very strong, so have to see where this one plays out. Bog Beast, 6 mana, 3/6, Taunt, Death Rattle, summon a 2/4 Muckmare with Taunt. So for 6 mana, you get 10 points of Taunt in play, unless this somehow gets silenced. Seems pretty reasonable as far as the stat line goes on this. I think about the Paladin card, Immortalized in Stone, where you get the 1/2, the 2/4, and the 4/8. You know, that's 14 points of health at 7 mana, and it feels good in a defensive deck. There's no way that this sees any kind of play in an aggressive deck. There's no way that it sees play really even in a mid-range deck. So the question is the card good enough to see play in a control deck? And the answer to that, I'm going to say, is no. There's just better options. Paladin, Immortalized in Stone, I think, is a better option. And then with Warrior, even that 4 mana Burden of Pride that we just took a look at is likely going to be better than this. So I'm going to say the card is bad and is not going to see any play. Last new neutral card, 2 mana Maze Guide, Battlecry, summon a random 2-cost minion. So you get a 1/1 for 2 mana, you get a 1/1 and a 2-cost minion. This card is also bad. There are lots of 2-cost minions in the game. Potentially you could high roll and hit a decent 2 mana minion, like if you hit, say, the Bibliomite that we were taking a look at earlier, then that's a high roll and that's really good. But potentially, you know, you hit something significantly weaker than that, and it just ends up being pretty bad. So I'm going to say this is a bad card. It's just a little bit too random. Could potentially have some very, very high rolly outcomes, like with the Bibliomite. But overall, it's going to be a bad card, and just not going to be impactful enough to see play in any serious deck, in my opinion, right now, at least. Based on future cards that we see revealed, of course. Hedge my bets against the future reveals. And Mage, we have Suspicious Alchemists, a 1 mana 1/3, Battlecry, discover a spell. If your opponent guesses your choice, they get a copy. The interesting thing about this, so when I reviewed the Priest card that had this same kind of text where you discover a legendary, and if your opponent guesses it, they get a copy, I felt like that card was bad. This card in Mage, though, is interesting. I think this could just be a solid 1-drop for Mage. Discover a spell, you know, you could discover Burn, you could discover something to support like your Volatile Skeleton package, and when your opponent, if they guess your spell and get a copy, if you do get something that supports your Volatile Skeleton package, they end up with a card that has no synergy with their deck, which makes it significantly worse for them, and maybe so bad that they just never actually play it. So, I do think this has the potential to be a good and playable card, and certainly as a 1-drop for Mage, Mage doesn't really have any 1-drops that they're wanting to play right now. It's also going to be... It is a little bit skill testing with Discover, but if a deck is created, a Mage deck that runs this card, after, you know, a few games, you're going to be able to look at it and you're going to know on the Discover what your opponent would likely pick, because it supports their game plan. So if it's like some type of aggro Mage deck and they find like a direct damage spell, like a Frozen Touch or a Fireball, then you could probably take a pretty reasonable guess that that's what they picked. So at that point, as people figure out the deck and the game plan and what you would really want to discover, it's going to be easier over time to, you know, for your opponent to be able to get the same card that you got. So card likely gets worse actually over time and as decks get played more and play patterns emerge. But I do think this is probably a serviceable 1-drop if Mage finds itself a deck where it actually needs a 1-drop. Rogue. 2 mana, Serrated Bone Spike, deal 3 damage to a minion. If it dies, your next card this turn costs 2 less. This is just really solid removal for Rogue. You can almost kind of think about it as being a free card, 0, because if you're able to kill a minion with it, your next card costs 2 less, so that's the same as this thing costing 0. So definitely think this card's going to see play. I feel like the Necrolord Sinstone Graveyard deck is almost a given, just based on what we've seen revealed. And this plays in really nicely. You know, you spend a card, and then your next card is either free or much cheaper, which makes Necrolord and Sinstone Graveyard better. So again, just quality removal for Rogue. Also important to note here, there's no honorable kill condition. So any minion with 1, 2, or 3 health, you'll just be able to kill it, and then you'll be able to discount your next card this turn by 2. Mana Cheat in Hearthstone, again, is just really good. So strong card. I think it's going to see a lot of play here. And moving down to Paladin, a 3 mana 2/4 Taunt, Battle's Cry, discover a Paladin card. So here's the thing that you got to understand about this. Paladin cards are bad cards, and by the transitive property of badness, this card is bad. Because this is a 3 mana 2/4 Taunt, discover a bad card, is what it really says on the text here. So this card, it's just bad, and it's really not worth our time. And that is actually the last card that has been revealed since my last video. So definitely looking forward to more reveals. They're going to be coming quick. I'm going to get out another video probably here in the next few days. I like to let a couple of reveals pile up so then I can put together a nice little video as we go over these cards. If you're interested again in my thoughts on these other cards that weren't covered in this video, parts 1, 2, and 3 are up on my YouTube channel. And with reveal season in full swing, I know my hype is starting to grow. I'm ready to be able to play some of these new cards. We've got the theory crafting stream that's going to be coming up on July 21st. And just to be clear at this point, I am not a part of that. You know, I'm not going to be in that theory crafting stream, but I will be watching the people that are playing. We're probably going to get a good look at some of the newer decks, at least rough archetypes that are going to be able to be refined as we get into the expansion that launches, I believe, on August 2nd. That's going to do it for this video. I'm Uncorrupt, and I look forward to seeing you for the next card review video.